An evil cop named Officer Barry steals a luxury car from a black teenage girl named Jennifer, convinced she's a thief. But just 3 minutes later, the tables turn, and he's desperately begging for mercy. Will he escape the consequences of his actions, or is he about to face a reckoning with his own prejudice? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Jennifer Carter was driving her dad's sleek black luxury car with a huge smile on her face. The streets of the wealthy neighborhood she was driving through were lit up by trees in a warm glow from the sun. It made her smile to think about the letter she got yesterday telling her she was accepted to her dream college. She whispered to herself, "I did it," and her fingers tapped excitedly on the driving wheel. It was worth all the hard work in the end. At age 18, Jennifer was a smart young woman who had a bright future ahead of her. She bobbed her head to the soft music on the radio, which made her dark hair move. She thought she was invincible, and nothing could get her down. Jennifer thought about her dad, Commander Matthew Jackson. He was so happy when she showed him the acceptance letter. His eyes lit up, and he hugged her tight and whispered, "That's my girl." Her idea to use his car to celebrate was his idea. Jennifer couldn't help but be amazed by the beautiful homes that lined the streets as she drove down the wide, clean streets. Better and bigger than the last one, it seemed. They were met with well-kept grounds that were dotted with flower beds and fancy fountains. One day, Jennifer told herself, "I'll have a house like this. I'll make my dad proud." The thought of the future made her happy. She thought about going for walks on campus, meeting new people, and learning new things. She imagined herself in a cap and gown, with her family cheering as she got her diploma. There seemed to be a lot of options. Jennifer took a big breath and smelled the leather inside the car. When she was in such a fancy car, she felt grown up and important. It wasn't at all like the old car she usually took to school. Jennifer's teachers had pushed her to do well. Her friends had studied with her late at night. And most of all, her father, Commander Jackson, had always been there for her and told her to reach for the stars. As she turned onto a quiet street, she thought of all the people who had helped her along the way. Jennifer thought, "I'm so lucky," and a wave of thanks washed over her. She was thinking about how happy she was that she didn't notice the bright police car coming up behind her. At that very moment, Jennifer had no idea that her perfect day was about to take a sudden turn for the worse. Things were going to change in her life in ways she couldn't even imagine. Jennifer was lost in her happy thoughts as she drove down the quiet street in the suburbs. She didn't notice the police car pulling out behind her. Officer Barry, a middle-aged man, with a firm, stern face and cold eyes, kept an eye on the fancy car and became more and more suspicious. Barry said to himself, "There's no way that kid owns a car like that." He pressed his lips together into a thin line. For no reason, he turned on his lights and alarm. When she heard the noise, her heart jumped. When she looked in her rearview mirror, she saw the police car and felt confused. She carefully pulled over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. Her hands were shaking a little. Officer Barry walked up to the window on the driver's side and put his hand on his belt. "License and registration," he yelled, not even stopping to say hello. Jennifer creased her face, but she kept her cool. "Of course, officer. May I ask what I did wrong?" Barry's eyes got dark. "Just hand over the papers, miss." Jennifer gave a small nod and reached for her wallet and the glove box, pulling out the things that were asked for. Barry grabbed them from her hand when she gave them to him. When Barry said, "This car is registered to a Commander Jackson," he meant to accuse. "Care to explain that?" Jennifer tried to stay relaxed by taking a deep breath. "Yes, sir. Commander Jackson is my father. He lent me the car to celebrate my college acceptance." Barry laughed, making it clear he didn't believe her. "Right, and I'm the Easter Bunny. Step out of the vehicle, miss." Jennifer's heart was beating fast, but she stayed calm. "Officer, I'm telling you the truth. You can call my father to verify. I told you to get out of the car, Barry started, his voice rising. Jennifer slowly opened the door and walked out, but her legs were weak. She stood tall and looked at Barry with all the grace she could muster. Sir, please, she said again, this time with a little shaking in her voice. There's been a misunderstanding. I haven't done anything wrong. Barry, on the other hand, wasn't paying attention. His beliefs kept him from seeing the truth. Putting his hands on the car, he told them to turn around. Jennifer could feel tears coming to her eyes, but she blinked them away. She didn't believe what was going on. Just a short time ago, she felt great, but now she was being treated like a thief. Putting her hands on the warm metal of her dad's car made Jennifer feel the stress in the air rise. Officer Barry wasn't going to listen to her reasons. He had already made up his mind, and it broke her heart. The wonderful day she had been having just moments ago seemed like a long time ago. Jennifer was frozen in shock, thinking how things could have gone so badly in such a short time. Officer Barry stomped back to his police car while holding Jennifer's papers very tightly. He slammed the door shut and started typing quickly on his phone. As he read the registration information, his face turned into a frown. He whispered, "Matthew Jackson," and his eyes got narrow. Barry already had his mind made up when he said, "Yeah, right." He thought this young black girl couldn't have a connection to someone important enough to own such a pricey car. He couldn't see any other option because of his biases. Getting out of his police car, he walked back to Jennifer, who was still standing nervously by her dad's car. When she saw how angry Barry looked, her heart sank. Barry barked, "All right, miss," his voice full of sarcasm. "You want to explain to me why this car is registered to a Matthew Jackson?" Jennifer took a big breath and worked hard to keep her voice steady. "Like I said, officer, Matthew Jackson is my father. He's a police commander. If you just call him, he can." "Enough with the lies," Barry yelled, his face turning red. "Step out of the vehicle. Now." Jennifer slowly opened the car door with shaking hands. She was about to cry, but she blinked them away because she was determined to keep her cool. She begged, "Sir, please," and her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm telling you the truth. I haven't done anything wrong." Barry didn't pay attention, though. As he glared at Jennifer, he put his hand on his belt. Putting his hands on the car, he told them to turn around. Jennifer did what she was told, but her heart was beating so fast she thought it would burst. She didn't believe what was going on. She was feeling great an hour ago, but now she's being treated like a thief. Barry's voice was loud on his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Barry. I'm going to need backup at my location. I've got a possible stolen vehicle situation." She felt scared as soon as she heard those words. She shut her eyes and prayed in her head that this nightmare would end. She missed her dad and wished he was here to keep her safe. "Officer, please," Jennifer begged one last time, her voice shaking. "Just call my father. He can explain everything." Barry's face turned serious. "I've had enough of your stories, young lady. You're in serious trouble now." It was so tense in the air that they could cut it with a knife while they waited for help to come. Jennifer put her hands on the warm metal of her dad's car and stood there, thinking how her perfect day could have gone so badly. Jennifer's heart was racing as Officer Barry grabbed her arm and dragged her away from the car. She fell as he pushed her toward the police car. She was trying to keep her balance. Jennifer begged, "Please, officer." Her voice was shaking. "You're making a mistake. Just call my father." Barry didn't look at her, and his eyes stayed cold and hard. He yelled, "Please turn around," and Jennifer turned around to face the car. Tahoe could feel the cold metal of her handcuffs on her arms. She could still hear the locked and click of the cuffs, a sound that would stay with her for years. As the truth of the situation hit her, tears filled her eyes. "You have the right to remain silent," Barry said in a robotic voice. But Jennifer could barely hear him because her heart was beating so fast. Cars behind them slowed down and looked at what was happening. They looked at Jennifer and judged her. She was ready to scream, to tell them she wasn't guilty, but she couldn't get the words out. She tried again, but this time, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Officer, please listen to me. My father is Commander Jackson. If you just call him." Barry snapped, "Enough," and cut her off. "I've had enough of your lies. You're only making this worse for yourself." Jennifer was shocked to find that what she had said didn't matter to this guy. Her heart sank. She was embarrassed, small, and unable to do anything. In case things couldn't get any worse, Barry looked at the fancy car again. He took out his radio and talked on it. "Dispatch, I'm going to need a tow truck at my location. We've got a vehicle to impound." Jennifer's eyes got really big in shock. She finally lost her cool and yelled, "No. You can't. That's my father's car. Please don't take it." But Barry didn't care that she was upset. He started to fill out papers while looking at Jennifer every once in a while with a smug grin. Jennifer slouched against the police car and let out a sad sound. She couldn't do anything as a tow truck pulled up, its lights flashing in the dim light. The driver hooked up her dad's car and got ready to take it away. As the tow truck lifted the expensive car, Jennifer felt like a piece of her heart was being torn out. That car stood for a lot of things: her father's joy, her own successes, and the bright future that she felt was slipping away from her. She was sitting on the cold concrete ground, and the handcuffs on her wrists hurt. People walking by slowed down, and some even stopped to look at the young woman, who looked like she was in trouble. They were looking at her with eyes that were both interested and critical. She tried to shrink herself and wished she could disappear, because she felt ashamed. Jennifer got her phone out of her pocket even though her fingers were shaking. She called her dad's number and hoped he would answer right away. She heard his voice 3 times before she finally picked up the phone. Commander Jackson's worry could be heard over the phone. "Jennifer, what's wrong, sweetheart?" Jennifer's voice broke as she yelled, "Dad, I need your help. I've been arrested. They think I stole your car." Officer Jackson's words came back with a sense of urgency after a moment of stunned silence. "Where are you?" "I'm on my way right now." Jennifer told her where she was, and she could hear her dad grabbing his keys and running out the door. Jennifer had a small bit of hope in her heart after the call finished. Her dad was coming over and would take care of this. Officer Barry stood a few feet away with his arms crossed and looked out the window for the tow truck. He smiled proudly because he was sure he had caught the car thief in the act. He would look at Jennifer every once in a while and shake his head. "No, you should have thought twice before trying to go for a joyride in a stolen car, Missy," Barry yelled, his voice full of snobbery. Jennifer bit her lip because she didn't want to argue. She knew it wasn't going to help. She decided to take deep breaths and try to stay relaxed until her dad got there. For Jennifer, the minutes went by so slowly that they seemed like hours. She looked up when she heard the sound of tires screeching. Hope filled her heart as the tow truck pulled up. Officer Barry pushed Jennifer into the back of his police car in a rough way. The girl's heart sank as she saw the beloved car of her father being hooked up to be towed away. Even though tears hurt her eyes, she blinked them back because she was determined to keep going. It was tense and quiet on the way to the police station. Jennifer looked out the window. She was worried and angry, and her mind was running. She was shocked at how quickly her dream day had turned into a nightmare. Barry took Jennifer inside the station while her hands were still cuffed behind her back. They thought the neon lights were mean and harsh as they walked through the busy hallways. Jennifer felt small and weak because she was very aware that other cops and staff were staring at her. Barry put Jennifer in a hard plastic chair next to his desk and didn't bother to take her handcuffs off. The metal hurt her arms, but she didn't say anything because she knew her dad would be there soon. At that very moment, the doors to the station flew open. Commander Matthew Jackson walked in with a mask of calm anger on his face. As soon as he looked at Jennifer, his face relaxed for a moment. When he turned to face Officer Barry, it hardened again. His eyes went right to Jennifer, and his face turned angry and worried at the same time. He ran to his daughter and got down on his knees next to her on the ground. He asked her softly, "Jennifer, are you okay?" As he looked over her to see if she was hurt. She said, "I'm okay, Dad," in a soft voice. "Just scared and embarrassed." "Excuse me," Jackson said, and his voice was calm, but had a steely tone to it. "I'd like an explanation for why my daughter is in handcuffs." Barry only briefly looked up from his work. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. I'm in the middle of processing a car thief." Jennifer's eyes got really big when she heard Barry's rude tone. When she was about to speak, her father gave her a small shake of the head, which stopped her. Jackson clenched his teeth and took a deep breath. "Officer, I'm Commander Matthew Jackson. That stolen car belongs to me, and the young woman you've arrested is my daughter." Barry's face turned pale as he understood what he had done wrong. It was hard for him to say, "Key, Commander Jackson, I didn't know." "Clearly," Jackson said, and his voice was as cold as ice. "Would you care to explain why you arrested my daughter without proper cause?" Barry wasn't sure what to say, and Jackson looked around the room. While others had stopped what they were doing to watch the scene, they were both interested and uneasy. You could feel the stress in the air. When Jackson looked back at Barry, his eyes got narrow. "I'm waiting for an explanation, officer, and while you're at it, perhaps you can tell me why my daughter is still in handcuffs." There was the sound of a tow truck coming up behind Commander Jackson, who had his serious eyes on Officer Barry. As more people in the station realized what was going on, the stress seemed to rise. "Sir," Barry began, his voice a little shaky, "I was just following the rules." Jackson spoke up, his voice low and steady. "The car? The car that you're about to tow away? The car that I gave to my daughter as a gift for her hard work and college acceptance?" Barry had a red face that showed he was both embarrassed and angry. He was about to answer, but the station doors opened again before he could. Barry's partner, Officer Minda Ramirez, ran in and looked around with wide eyes. When she looked at Commander Jackson, she stopped in her tracks. "Commander Jackson," she said, sounding surprised and a little scared. "What are you doing here, sir?" When Barry turned his head to look at his buddy, surprise was written all over his face. Right away, Sarah ran over to him and leaned in close. To say, "Barry, that's Commander Jackson, our new boss. He just moved here last week. What's going on?" It hit Barry like a ton of rocks, how bad his mistake was. The color left his face. He looked quickly back and forth between Jennifer, who was still in the chair with her hands tied, Sarah, and Commander Jackson. Jackson looked at both of the cops and raised an eyebrow. "I see we don't need to introduce ourselves," he said, with a sarcastic tone. "Now, would someone care to explain why my daughter is still in handcuffs?" The other police officers in the station were all quiet, their eyes fixed on the scene that was happening. As Barry tried to open Jennifer's handcuffs, he fumbled with his keys, and his hand started to shake a little. When Barry finally said, "I'm sorry, sir," he lost all of his cockiness. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. When Jennifer's handcuffs came off, she rubbed her wrists and felt relief wash over her face. Jackson helped her get up by putting his arm around her shoulders to keep her safe. "A misunderstanding?" Jackson asked again, but this time, his voice was too calm. "Is that what we're calling racial profiling these days, Officer Barry?" The charge made Barry flinch, and his face showed that he was both ashamed and scared. Sarah stepped forward and said she was sorry. She tried to fix things by saying, "Commander, promise you, this is a misunderstanding on our end. We'll make sure the tow truck is called off immediately." Jackson gave a short nod, but his eyes were still on Barry. "I think it's time we had a serious discussion about proper police procedures and the consequences of making assumptions based on race." Barry straightened his back as he said this. trying to get back some control. "Commander, I was just following standard procedure at car," he said, but his voice was shaking. His voice was low and sharp, and he cut him off. "Standard procedure? Is it standard procedure to handcuff a young woman without proper cause?" Barry's face turned red. He coughed and desperately tried to think of something. "Sir, we had reason to believe the vehicle was stolen." Jackson cut him off again, his patience wearing thin. "The registration? Did you even bother to listen when my daughter tried to explain that to you?" Jennifer, who was still sitting down and bound, looked up at her dad with eyes that were both relieved and still scared. The other cops in the station moved around awkwardly, and you could feel the tension in the air. Captain Jackson never took his eyes off of Barry while he talked. His speech was calm but authoritative. "Remove those handcuffs from my daughter now." Barry thought about what to do for a moment, but his pride was fighting with the truth of the matter. Then he slowly reached for his keys. His hands were shaking a little as he released the handcuffs. In the quiet station, the metal cuffs fell off and made a loud noise. Jennifer rubbed her wrists, and a smile spread across her face. She got up and moved closer to her dad. He put his hand on her shoulder to keep her safe. Barry stepped back, losing all the confidence he had earlier. He opened his mouth to talk, but then shut it again because he didn't know what to say. Officer Ramirez stepped forward when he felt the strain. "Commander, assure you this isn't how we typically operate. We'll make sure this incident is properly documented and addressed." Jackson quickly gave Ramirez a nod and then turned his attention back to Barry. "Officer, I think it's time we had a serious discussion about proper police procedures and the dangers of making assumptions based on race." The full weight of Barry's mistake finally hit him, and his face turned pale. But even then, he had a look of anger on his face. He ironed his clothes and held on to the last bit of power he had left. "Sir, I was just trying to do my job. If you'd allow me to explain." When Jackson asked, "Explain?" his voice was quiet, but tense with anger. "Explain why you felt it necessary to humiliate and handcuff an innocent young woman without even listening to her? Explain why you were so quick to assume she was a criminal based solely on her appearance." Barry opened and closed his mouth, but he couldn't say anything. Even though he knew what he had done was wrong, his pride kept him from fully admitting it. It felt like the handcuffs were still on Jennifer's skin as she rubbed her wrists. As she looked up at her dad, her eyes were wet with tears that hadn't dried yet. She was looking for relief in his familiar presence. Captain Jackson pulled her close by, putting his arm around her shoulders. "It's okay, baby girl," he said in a soft, comforting voice. "You're safe now." Jennifer leaned into her dad's hug and felt stronger because he was always there. Even though she felt better in his arms, she couldn't get rid of the shame that stuck to her like a second skin. She felt ashamed every time she thought about being handcuffed in front of curious people. Jackson's eyes, which are normally warm and friendly, were now lit up with anger that was hard to hold back. He looked at Officer Barry, who was frozen in place. Instead of being cocky, Barry's face showed growing fear. The officer's face was pale, and he was having trouble speaking. His mouth moved back and forth like a fish out of water. Jackson spoke in a cool but stern voice. "Officer Barry, I hope you understand how serious what's happened here today is." A tense silence broke. Barry swallowed hard, and his Adam's apple moved tensely. He moved his feet around and looked at everything but the father and daughter in front of him. The weight of what he did seemed to press down on his shoulders, making him look smaller as time went on. Jackson went on, speaking slowly and carefully. "There will be consequences for your actions. This incident will not be swept under the rug or forgotten." When Jackson spoke, the full force of what he said hit Barry like a solid blow. He opened his mouth to talk, but nothing came out. It looked like he finally understood how bad things were for him. It was written all over his face. The other cops in the station watched the events with faces that showed a mix of shock and discomfort. Everyone was very aware of how important this moment was. And the stress in the air was so thick that you could cut it with a knife. Jennifer lifted her chin while still being held close by her father. Even though she was still scared and embarrassed, she had a spark of determination in her eyes. She spoke in a quiet but steady voice, as she looked right at Officer Barry. "I hope you learn from this. No one should have to go through what I did today." The way her words hung in the air was a powerful sign of how strong and tough she was when things were unfair. Jackson gently put his hand on her shoulder, filled with joy. Ling with eyes red with anger. Commander Jackson took a big breath and looked around at the other officers who were standing there. You could feel the tension in the air, but Jackson's calm attitude seemed to calm things down. He led Jennifer carefully to a nearby bench and made sure she was comfy before he spoke to the police. He started, "Gentlemen," his voice strong and clear. "I think it's time we had an honest talk about what happened here today." He took a moment to let what he said sink in. "As some of you may already know, Commander Matthew Jackson, your new police chief." The group felt a wave of surprise go through it. The realization hit Officer Barry again, of how badly he had misread the situation, and his face turned even paler. Jackson went on, and his tone was calm and thoughtful. "I want to make something very clear from the outset. In this department, under my leadership, we will value fairness and justice above all else. What transpired here today falls far short of those ideals." He looked at Officer Barry, and his look made Barry seem smaller. However, Jackson's voice became kinder instead of harsher, which was clearly what Barry was expecting. "Officer Barry, I won't deny that I'm deeply disappointed by your conduct today. However, I believe that moments like these can be opportunities for growth and change." Barry blinked in surprise, because he clearly wasn't ready for this. Jackson said, "I want you to take some time to reflect on your actions. Think about the assumptions you made, the biases that influenced your decisions. Consider how this incident has affected not just my daughter, but our community's trust in law enforcement." Jackson's words seemed to hit home with the other cops as well. Many of them shifted uncomfortably, possibly realizing that they had similar biases. "This isn't about punishment," Jackson insisted, his voice strong. "It's about learning, growing, and becoming better officers, better people. I believe in second chances, in the power of redemption. But that redemption must be earned through genuine reflection and a commitment to change." He looked at everyone in the group and looked at each cop. "I want all of you to use this incident as a catalyst for self-examination. We have a responsibility to protect and serve all members of our community, regardless of their race, age, or appearance. We must do better." Jackson's words were strong and moving, and they hung in the air. Even Jennifer, who was still upset from what had happened, looked up at her dad with a mix of pride and respect. At this very moment, he showed truly amazing wisdom and guidance. Jennifer had been sitting on the bench with her eyes on the ground and not moving. She slowly raised her head. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady, which caught everyone's attention. "I've always been taught to respect the police," she said, breaking the tense silence. "I thought I'd be fine if I was nice and did everything right, but today..." She stopped and took a weak breath. "Today, I felt powerless, like nothing I said mattered." The cops moved around uncomfortably, but Jennifer kept talking, and her voice got stronger. "When those handcuffs went on, it wasn't just my wrists that hurt. It was my pride, my sense of who I am. In that moment, I wasn't Jennifer Carter, the girl who just got into her dream college. I was just another stereotype." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, determined to finish. "I felt like I was being punished for something amazing. I couldn't change the color of my skin. Do you know how that feels? To be judged before you even open your mouth?" Officer Barry's face had turned pale, and he was no longer proud in any way. He looked like Jennifer's words were hitting him hard, making him face the real effects of what he had done. Jennifer's voice started to shake as she said, I've worked so hard to get where I am. I've dreamed of this day for so long, and in just a few minutes, it all felt like it was being taken away, not because of anything I did wrong, but because of how I look. The air around them had become heavy and full of feeling. People who had come to watch the scene were also quiet, and many of them were wiping away tears. Jennifer looked straight at Officer Barry. Even though her eyes hurt, she kept her gaze steady. I want you to understand that your actions have consequences. They don't just end when the handcuffs come off. They stay with us, shaping how we see the world and our place in it. Barry's eyes were wide, showing that he was both ashamed and beginning to understand. He opened his mouth to talk, but nothing came out. He couldn't say anything because Jennifer's words were so powerful. He put a soft hand on Jennifer's shoulder, and his eyes were filled with both pride and sadness. The other cop stood there in shock and silence, finally understanding how bad things were. When Commander Jackson looked at Officer Barry, his eyes were filled with both sadness and hope. His voice was calm but strong. Officer Barry, I need to know something. Are you ready to learn from this mistake, or do you plan to keep defending what you did? Barry stood there, losing all the confidence he had earlier. He kept thinking about Jennifer's words, which made him face the truth of what he'd done. He wasn't sure what to do. For the first time in his career, I don't know what to say, Barry stuttered, and his voice was almost a whisper. He looked back at Commander Jackson and then at Jennifer. His eyes darted back and forth between the two. I was so sure I was doing my job, but now, Barry turned out to be less tough than he seemed. As he reached up to wipe the sweat off his forehead, his hands were shaking a little. His face showed that he was having a hard time inside. He was fighting his pride against the growing awareness that he had done something wrong. Barry's voice was shaking as he said, I've always thought I was a good cop. But hearing Jennifer speak, it's made me question everything. Maybe I've been wrong all along. Commander Jackson slowly nodded, telling Barry to keep going. The other cops stood there and did nothing as they saw a change start to happen. Barry tried to find the right words and took a big breath. He dropped the ball and couldn't finish the sentence. I never thought about how my actions might affect someone like Jennifer. I just saw, I assumed. Jennifer kept a close eye on Barry. The anger she had felt earlier had turned into a guarded hope. He was having a hard time inside, and she could see it on his face. Barry said slowly, I think I need to learn. I don't want to be the kind of officer who hurts people this way. He felt bad about what he did and looked at Jennifer. I'm sorry, I know that's not enough, but I truly am sorry. The climate changed around them. There was less stress than there had been since Jennifer was arrested. And there was a sense that things could change. Officer Barry fell back as he walked away from the group. He felt terrible about what he had done. He looked for a quiet place near his police car and leaned against it to try to make sense of what had done. His mind was full of thoughts about what he had done, what would happen, and the pain he had caused. At the same time, Commander Jackson paid full attention to his daughter. Jennifer stood there with her arms around herself tightly. She looked still very shaken from what she had been through. Jackson's eyes got soft as he looked at her, and he felt terrible for what she had been through. Jennifer, sweetheart, he asked her by putting a gentle hand on her shoulder, are you okay? Jennifer looked at her dad with tears in her eyes that she hadn't even cried yet. I don't know, Dad, she said in a shaking voice. I was so scared. I kept thinking about all those stories we hear on the news. Jackson gave her a tight hug and wrapped his strong arms around her to protect her. I know, baby girl, I know, he whispered, his voice heavy with sadness. But you're safe now. You did nothing wrong. You hear me? Nothing at all. Jennifer finally let out the tears she had been holding back as she hid her face in her dad's chest. Jackson sat close to her and rubbed her back gently while she cried. Many of the people who were there felt a lump form in their mouths as they watched the touching scene. Jackson, you were so brave, Jennifer, he said in a soft voice. You stayed calm and composed even when things got tough. I'm so proud of you." Jennifer took a small step back and used the back of her hand to wipe her eyes. "All I could think about was what you always told me," she said, her voice getting stronger. "To stay calm and use my words." Jackson gave her a soft smile and wiped a tear off her face. "That's my girl," he proudly said. "You did exactly the right thing." It seemed like the mood around the father and daughter changed as they shared this sweet moment. There was less tension at first, and there was more quiet thought in its place. People who had gathered to watch the drama unfold stood still and quietly. Many of them were touched by Jackson and Jennifer's show of love and support. Everyone there had a chance to take a deep breath and deal with how they felt about what was going on. Jackson's bond with his daughter Jennifer as a father-daughter showed how important family, love, and respect can be when things go wrong. When the sun rose over the city the next morning, it cast a warm glow on the streets where the tense fight had happened the day before. Commander Jackson sipped his coffee at his desk in the police station and looked over the report from the day before. He had just finished a meeting with the department's PR team, where they talked about how to handle the problem within the company. All of a sudden, someone knocked on his office door. "Come in," Jackson said as he put down his drink. Officer Barry walked in and looked clearly stressed. He didn't seem as sure of himself as normal. Instead, he was filled with nervous energy. "Commander Jackson," he started, his voice rough, "I need to talk to you about what happened yesterday." Jackson's phone rang with a text message before he could answer. He took a quick look at it and read it with a frown on his face. He looked up from his phone and said, "It looks like we have a new development, Officer Barry. A passerby just informed me that a video of yesterday's incident has been recorded and is going viral on social media." Barry's face turned pale, and his eyes grew big with shock. "A video?" he asked again and again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Jackson stood up. He looked serious, but not mean. "This changes things, Barry. The public will soon know about the arrest, and we need to be prepared for the fallout." Jackson's phone started to ring right on time. It looked like it came from the mayor's office on the caller ID. Jackson waved his hand at Barry to tell him to wait while he took the call. Jackson was talking quietly, and Barry sat down in a nearby chair with his mind running. It hit him like a ton of bricks, what this popular video could mean for his job and his personal life. He could already picture how angry people would be, how they would want his badge, and how shame would follow him and his family. Jackson finished the call and turned back to Barry. Barry's eyes were filled with fear and desperation as he looked up at Jackson. "Sir," Barry asked in a shaky voice, "what's going to happen now?" Commander Jackson took a big breath and carefully thought about what he was saying. "The situation has become more complicated, Barry. The video is spreading fast, and we're going to have to address this publicly. The mayor is calling for an immediate press conference." Barry's face scrunched up as the full weight of what he had done hit him. "I never meant for this to happen," he said, in a voice that was hard to hear. "I thought I was doing my job, but now everything's falling apart." Jackson looked at the police officer and saw the fight inside him show on his face. The captain knew that the next few days would be hard for everyone, but especially for Barry. "Commander Jackson," he broke the nervous silence with a soft voice, "I need you to understand how serious this is. This video could change everything." Barry nodded, but his eyes were sad. "I know, sir. I'm scared of what might happen." Jackson went to the window and looked down at the busy city below. It was getting more and more tense in the streets as word of the film spread. "There are two ways for us to go," he said, his voice calm, even though his thoughts were racing. "We can let the video run its course, allowing public pressure to force change in our department. Or we can try to get ahead of this, protecting our officers from the harshest backlash." Taking a deep breath, he turned around to face Barry. "Neither choice is easy, and both will have consequences we can't fully predict." Barry looked up, and his face showed that he was both scared and hopeful. What are you thinking, sir?" Jackson let out a heavy sigh and ran his hand over his face. If we let the video spread unchecked, it could lead to real, meaningful change in how we operate. The public outcry might force reforms we've been struggling to implement for years. He stopped and thought about the other side. But it could also make people lose their jobs, including you, Barry. The backlash could be terrible for you and your family as well. Barry felt sick at the thought of it, but he didn't say anything because he wanted Jackson to finish. On the other hand, Jackson said, "If we try to get ahead of this, control the narrative, we might be able to protect our officers from the worst of the public anger. We could use this as an opportunity to show that we're committed to change without sacrificing individuals to public outrage." Getting back to his desk, he walked with a focused look on his face. "But if we do that, we risk looking like we're covering something up. It could undermine public trust even further, making it harder to implement real change in the long run." As Jackson thought about his choices, the room went quiet. He could almost feel Barry's tense gaze on him and hear his heart beating fast. I could hear the city sounds getting louder outside. It was like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for him to decide. Jackson's phone rang again. It was a message from the mayor's office that needed an answer right away. The stress was building, and he knew he needed to decide soon. But he was worried about what would happen if he went down either road. Each had its own risks and possible benefits. Commander Jackson took a big breath and made up his mind. He turned to look at the cops who were gathered in the room. The looks on their faces showed that they were both nervous and excited. He told everyone, "Listen up." His speech was calm but firm. "We're going to tackle this head on. I won't let our department be torn apart by public outrage. But I also won't sweep our mistakes under the rug." The police officers looked at each other nervously, but Jackson kept going, his resolve unflinching. "We're going to hold a press conference right now. We'll acknowledge what happened yesterday, but we'll also show that we're committed to learning and growing from this experience." Officer Barry looked up with a shocked look on his face. "Sir, are you sure? What about the video?" Jackson put his hand on Barry's shoulder to make him feel better. "The video is out there, Barry. We can't change that, but we can control how we respond to it. This is our chance to show the community that we're not afraid to face our mistakes and work to be better." He turned around to talk to everyone in the room. "This isn't about protecting ourselves. It's about protecting the trust between us and the people we serve. We need to show them that we are human, that we make mistakes, but that we're also committed to fixing those mistakes." As the cops began to understand why Jackson's plan was good, the tension in the room began to ease. Barry, who looked like he was scared, seemed to stand a little taller. Jackson went on, and his voice got louder. "I want all of you there. This isn't just about one incident or one officer. This is about all of us committing to do better, to be better." He stopped and looked each cop straight in the eye. "We have a chance here to turn this into something positive, to show real leadership and integrity. Are you with me?" The room was filled with cries of, "Yes, sir," and the mood changed from fear to determination. Jackson said, "Yes," and a small smile crept across his face. "All right then, let's get ready. We've got a lot of work to do." Jackson had a range of feelings as the police turned out to get ready for the press meeting. There would be hard times ahead, but he was sure it was the right way. This was his chance to show not only how good a boss he is, but also how his department really is. He thought about Jennifer, who was still scared, but was at home safe. He hoped that this choice would help rebuild trust in the system for everyone, including his daughter. He took a deep breath, straightened his outfit, and walked out to face the cameras, ready to show them how to do it. Captain Jackson was on the platform, and his face showed that he was calm and determined. A lot of reporters were in the room, with their cameras and recorders pointed at him. He took a big breath because the situation was heavy on his mind. He started by saying, "Good afternoon, everyone." His speech was steady and clear. "What happened yesterday between one of our cops and my daughter, Jennifer Carter, was very bad. I'm here today to talk about it." The room went quiet as reporters leaned in to hear more. Jackson went on to say, "What happened yesterday wasn't just a mistake. It was a clear example of racial profiling, and it's something we cannot and will not tolerate in our police department." He took a moment to let what he said sink in before going on. "My daughter was handcuffed and almost arrested for driving a family car. She is a smart young woman with a bright future ahead of her. The only thing that made people suspicious was the color of her skin." The room was now quiet, and everyone was looking at Jackson as he spoke. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. What took place hurt my daughter, our family, and the people in our town. But I'm not here to talk about that pain. I'm here to talk about how we can use this to make real, long-lasting change." Jackson's voice got louder and more determined. "This event has shown us that we need to do more. We need to do something about the biases in our field and in ourselves. We need to do better, and we will do better," he said, listing a number of changes that would be made, such as making all cops go through bias training and setting up a community oversight board. As he spoke, the mood in the room started to change. The reporters who were expecting Jackson to take a defensive stance were, instead, captivated by his honesty and determination to make things better. Jackson looked around the room and said, "I want to be clear. This isn't just about one event or one police officer. This is about making a police force that really serves and protects everyone in our community, no matter what race or background they are," he said. As he finished his speech, the room felt full of hope. The reporters, who generally ask questions quickly, were quiet for a moment as they thought. Jackson's words touched a nerve, giving more than just an apology. They showed a way forward. The room was filled with Commander Jackson's strong words. Officer Barry stood quietly in the back, his eyes fixed on the man he had hurt the day before. What he did made it hard for him to breathe because it weighed him down. He heard Jackson talk about forgiving and making changes. His words washed over Barry like a hot knife through butter. Barry's thoughts went straight back to when he had stopped Jennifer. He remembered how cocky he sounded, and how he had talked down to her. Now, Barry felt bad about himself as he heard Jackson talk about how much his daughter hurt. His words could be heard all over the room. "We need to do better, and we will do better." Barry was really hurt by what he heard. He thought he would be shamed in public, lose his job, and have to deal with the anger of the people in the community. Instead, Jackson was there to give them a chance to make things right. Barry understood how big of a deal this was. As Jackson went on to talk about his plans for change, Barry felt something change inside him. The wall of pride and prejudice he had built up over the years started to fall apart. He finally understood the full effects of his actions, not just on Jennifer, but also on many other people he may have hurt in the past. Barry's eyes filled with tears as he heard Jackson talk about making the police force really serve everyone in the neighborhood. He knew how far he had gone from that ideal, how he had let his views color his judgment and make his badge look bad. The fact that Jackson forgave Barry made him feel like a tsunami. It was okay for this man to be mad and want Barry to be punished. Instead, he was talking about how to learn and grow. Barry felt both thankful and not good enough all at the same time. As the press meeting went on, Barry stood still, his mind reeling from how bad his mistakes were. When he thought about all the times he had judged or acted without thinking, he felt bad. He felt like his clothing was too heavy on his shoulders because of what he had done. There was a mix of hope and doubt in the room as the press meeting came to a close. Jackson got up from the platform. His shoulders were straight, but his eyes were tired. As he looked around the crowd, he saw Officer Barry still standing at the back, looking lost and stressed. Jackson made his way through the crowd that was breaking up, nodding at reporters and other police officers as he went. The cop put a soft hand on Barry's shoulder when he got to him. He said in a low voice, "Let's talk." Barry went with Jackson to a nearby small office that was empty. The weight of what they had said and done made the room feel too small. Barry stood up funny and looked down at the floor. He shut the door and turned to face Barry. "Officer," he said, first, in a strong but friendly voice, "please understand something important." Barry looked up, and his face showed that he was scared and ashamed. "I'm really sorry, sir. I know I did something wrong," Jackson said with a slow nod. He took a big breath and said, "You did, but that's not why we're here. Real justice isn't about punishment, Barry. It's about making things better." Barry looked puzzled, with his brow wrinkled. "Sir, I don't get it." "Because of what I did to your daughter." Jack agreed. "What you did was wrong. But making fun of you won't help. It won't help my daughter, and it definitely won't help our community," Barry said, with tears in his eyes. "Then what? What's going on now?" Jackson's face got softer. "Let's work on making things better for everyone," he said, after pausing to let what he had said sink in. "Barry, I want to give you a chance to be a part of something big. I want you to be a part of our department's new change program that is all about being sensitive to and understanding different racial groups." Barry's eyes got really big in shock. "Even after everything, you want me to take part?" Jackson said, "Even more so after everything. What you learn, and the way you got here could be useful. Another cop might learn from it and change." Barry felt a wave of emotions come over him. He was thankful, relieved, and deeply responsible at the same time. "Sir, I don't know what to say. Thanks. I promise I won't let you down." Jackson said, "Yes," with a small smile on his face. "Barry, this is your second chance. Take care of it, get smarter, help other people get smarter, and learn." With the weight of this chance bearing down on him, Barry squared his back. He felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. He was ready for the hard road that lay ahead. Barry said, with a steady, firm voice, "I will, sir. There is nothing I won't do to fix things." The police department got more and more lively as the days went by. Commander Jackson was in charge of the reform effort, which was well underway. Officers walked into training rooms with faces that showed a mix of interest and worry. Officer Barry was sitting in the front of one of these rooms with his notebook open and pen ready. There was some worry in his eyes, but there was also a spark of purpose. Barry paid close attention to every word the teacher said. When she started to talk about unconscious bias, "Everyone has biases," the teacher said in a soft but strong voice. "The important thing is to learn to spot them and challenge them." Barry looked around the room and saw that his coworkers were looking at him with thoughtful looks on their faces. Some people agreed by nodding their heads, while others moved around in their seats uncomfortable. He understood that he wasn't the only one struggling to face his biases. The training lessons got more in depth as the days went by. Officers are put in tough situations during role-playing drills, which forces them to face their automatic responses. In one case, Barry was sweating because he had to calm down a tense situation without using force. "Don't forget," the teacher told them, "communication is your most powerful tool." It was time for Barry to try again. This time, he focused on listening and understanding the person who was upset. He was shocked when the problem was solved quietly. Seeing that he was learning made him smile a little. Outside of the training rooms, the whole area could be seen to be changing. Walls were covered with posters that encouraged difference and acceptance. It was possible to hear officers talking about what they had learned over coffee in the break room. Slowly but surely, the mood was changing from worry to hope. One afternoon, Barry was paired up with Officer Maria Rodriguez for an event to reach out to the neighborhood. Barry felt a little nervous as they got ready to leave the station. "Are you ready?" Maria asked, with a smile on her face. "Take a deep breath, Barry, and then nod." "I believe that. There's something good about the difference." Barry felt like a weight was lifted off his shoulders as they walked through the neighborhood, talking to people and answering their questions. He was getting along with people in a way he never had before, seeing them as unique people instead of possible threats. Back at the station, Commander Jackson watched the changes with a cautious sense of hope. It gave him hope for the future to see police officers like Barry take their first steps toward becoming better public workers. As the reform program changed the police force even more, Jennifer Carter became the leader of a movement for change that was growing. From being weak, the young woman now stood tall, ready to tell the world her story. Jennifer took the stage at a neighborhood event on a warm afternoon, event put together by organizers in the area. As she walked up to the microphone, everyone stopped talking. Her proud father, Commander Jackson, was looking from the sidelines. Jennifer took a big breath and started to speak. Her hands were shaking a little. "A few weeks ago, I was just a girl excited about going to college," she said in a steady, soft voice. "Within minutes, I was handcuffed on the sidewalk and being treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin." The crowd listened carefully, and many of them nodded to show that they understood. Some people were moved to tears by Jennifer's words, which painted a clear picture of that terrible day. "I was scared," she said again, her voice getting a little rough. "I thought I was so small and powerless. For some reason, my voice and I didn't seem to matter." The crowd fell silent as they thought about what she said. Jennifer took a moment to gather her strength before going on. As she spoke, her voice got louder. "But today, I stand before you, not as a victim, but as someone who believes in the power of change. What took place to me was wrong, but it's also a chance for everyone to learn and grow." Jennifer's eyes shone with determination as she talked about her dreams for the future. There was talk about the change program her father had set up, and how it was already making a difference in the neighborhood. Jennifer spoke up with a clear, strong voice. "I believe in a future where no one has to feel the fear I felt that day. A future where we treat each other like people first. Where we listen and try to understand before we judge." People were glued to her every word because they were touched by how strong and graceful she was in the face of injustice. As soon as Jennifer finished her speech, the crowd cheered loudly, and many people stood up to give her a standing ovation. Jennifer understood at that moment that her voice, which had been shut down, could now make a difference. Her story touched people's hearts and opened their minds, making her a sign of hope. Jennifer's father hugged her as she left the stage. Commander Jackson held his daughter close, and his eyes shone with joy. He said in a whisper, "You did good, sweetheart. You did great." Officer Barry was having a hard time with the weight of his actions as the days went by. He kept thinking about Jennifer, who was handcuffed and looked bad. He knew he had to make things right, not just for Jennifer's sake, but also for his own growth. With Commander Jackson's help, Barry was brave enough to ask Jennifer to meet with him, even though he was nervously adjusting his uniform in the small meeting room. At the police station, his heart was beating fast. Someone made a noise in Barry's throat when Jennifer walked in with her father. She looked calm and sure of herself, which was very different from the scared young woman he had met that fateful day. "Jennifer," Barry said first, his voice a little shaky, "I'm so grateful that you agreed to meet with me. I need to say sorry to you." Jennifer nodded, and her face was guarded but open. "What I did to you was wrong," Barry said, after taking a big breath. "It wasn't fair and was mean. I'm truly sorry for the hurt and shame I caused you." Barry's eyes got wet as he talked. "It opened my eyes that day. There are prejudices I didn't even know I had that I've had to face. It's been hard, but I'm getting better. I wish I could be better." Jennifer paid close attention, and her face lit up with sadness when she saw Barry's real regret in his eyes. Barry looked at Commander Jackson and said, "Your father has been very patient with me. He has been showing me where these attitudes come from and how to get rid of them. I'm ready to change, even though I know I have a long way to go." Commander Jackson put his hand on Barry's shoulder and nodded to reassure him. Barry turned back to Jennifer, and his voice was full of faith. "I know that what I say can't change what happened, but I want you to know that your grace and strength have moved me. I promise to remember what you taught me every day at work." She thought about what Barry said for a moment. She then said, "Thank you, Officer Barry," with a small smile. "Sorry, it really means a lot to me. It's good that something good could come from that bad day." As the talk went on, Barry told us more about his process of self-reflection and the steps he was taking to deal with his biases. Jennifer paid close attention and sometimes asked questions or said what she thought. At the end of the meeting, everyone in the room could feel like they were getting better. Not only would people remember what happened, but it had also led to good changes for Barry and the whole police department. As the summer evening grew warmer, a lot of people gathered at the community center for the yearly Young Achievers ceremony. Parents, teachers, and people from the community came together to celebrate the accomplishments of local kids. The air was filled with joy and pride. In the back of the room, Officer Barry stood with the small medal in his hands, which made him tense up. After looking around the crowd, he finally saw Jennifer, who was sitting happily in the front row with her dad, Commander Jackson. The person in charge of the event took the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a special show. Officer Barry Thompson would like to give a prize and say a few words." As Barry walked to the stage, there was a silence in the room. He cleared his throat and started to speak, but his voice was a little shaky. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight I'm here to honor someone who has taught me more than any book or instructor could." Barry looked through the crowd and saw Jennifer's. "Are you Jennifer Carter? Could you please come up on stage with me?" Jennifer stood up from her seat and walked smoothly to the stage. She looked surprised. He turned to face her as she stood next to Barry. Barry spoke with a heavy heart. "Jennifer, your courage, honor, and willingness to forgive when things go wrong have been an inspiration to me and everyone in our community." He stopped and took a deep breath. "This award is a small way for us to thank you for your kindness and the good things you've done." Barry gave Jennifer the plaque, which said, "For great character and bravery in the face of hardship." As Jennifer took the award, the crowd cheered and many people wiped tears from their eyes. Jennifer spoke into the mic. Her voice was steady and loud. "Thank you, Officer Barry. I appreciate this more than you know." She looked at the people in the room. "What happened to me hurt, but it made our community better. I'm thankful for that and the chance to be a part of the change." Barry stood next to Jennifer and nodded to show that he agreed. The audience could see that they respected each other more, which was a strong sign of growth and healing. Jennifer turned to Barry after she was done talking and gave him a hug without planning to. The crowd let out a soft gasp, and then they started cheering even louder. In that moment, there was real peace, and it touched everyone inside. Commander Jackson came up to them as they left the stage together, his eyes shining with joy. He gave Barry a warm handshake and then hugged his daughter. While the ceremony went on, the effect of that moment was still felt. It showed how powerful healing, growth, and the chance for good change can be, even when bad things happen. Jennifer and Commander Jackson made their way through the crowd. As the Young Achievers program ended, at every turn, people who wanted to help them stopped them and said nice things. Jennifer held on tight to her award, which was a sign of how strong she was and how the community was coming together. It was dark when they got to the parking lot, but the sleek luxury car shone in the light. With a smile, Commander Jackson took out the keys and gave them to Jennifer. "You drive, sweetheart. You deserve it more than anything else." Jennifer's eyes lit up as she got behind the wheel. She started the engine with a happy purr as her father sat down next to her. Jennifer felt calm as they drove out of the parking lot. The car that had been the heart of a very painful event was now seen as a sign of her strength. Jennifer and her dad both noticed small changes. As they drove through the streets, they knew well in their neighborhood. On one corner, outside the community center, a group of police officers sat down and talked with some locals. A colorful banner told people about a diversity class that was coming up. Commander Jackson pointed to a painting that had just been painted on the side of a building and said, "Look at that." The words, "Unity in Diversity," were written across the top of the painting, which showed people of all races holding hands. Jennifer smiled and felt warm all the way through her chest. "Dad, things are really changing, aren't they?" "Yes, sweetheart," he said, with pride in his voice. "And you helped make that change happen." They turned onto their street and saw neighbors walking their dogs in the evening. As the car went by, the dogs waved and smiled. There was a strong sense of community, which was very different from how tense things were just a few months before. She turned to her dad as she parked the car in the driveway. "You know, Dad, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm kind of glad that happened. Look at how much good it's done." Captain Jackson put his hand on hers and squeezed it. "That's because you chose to act with forgiveness and grace, Jennifer. Everyone has seen how powerful those traits are in you." After the emotional service, they got out of the car and breathed in the cool evening air. Arm in arm, they walked to their front door. They were both very thankful for each other and for how far their community had come in becoming more united and understanding. Let me know in the comments section what interests you the most in this story. It takes me lots of time to put this story together for you. Kindly leave a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel and share this video. Also, check out our channel for more stories like this. Let's meet over there.